You've been asking for this one for a very long time, and we finally got them out to the courts. Today we're taking a look at the Volair Mach 1 Forza and Mach 2 Forza. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So yes, after months and months of waiting, we finally brought in the Forza, and the even better news is that we've also got the Mach 2 to talk about. Also, I know the setting is a little different. I came back home to Hawaii for Christmas, and the studio is definitely a work in progress, but hopefully you like it. So I'm going to review both paddles in this video. I'm going to talk a little bit about how they compare to each other, and of course, how they stack up in the industry in general. Now, of course, before we go on, remember that any of the paddles we talk about here, you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. Let's talk about some specs. The Mach 1 weighs 8 ounces in the 14mm version and 8.2 ounces for the 16. It's 16.5 inches long with a 5.5-inch handle and has that Hyperion-like hybrid-ish shape. It also has a T700 carbon top sheet, and compared to the standard Mach 1 model, the Forza is supposed to be more powerful because yes, it is thermoformed. The Mach 2 Forza has a much more interesting shape. It's actually very similar to the Jolla Scorpius, which is a paddle I really enjoyed when I reviewed it a few months back. The 14mm weighs 7.7 ounces and the 16mm weighs 8 ounces. It's 15.88 inches long and also has a 5.5-inch handle, so yes, a very short paddle face, and it's 8.12 inches wide. Like the Mach 1, it's also thermoformed and has the same T700 carbon top sheet, but as you would expect with those specs, it plays very differently. I really enjoyed playtesting these two paddles. I took them with me to Hawaii and played with them for quite a while, so let's get into it. Before we get into any of the Forza-specific playability, we need to talk about the biggest difference between the Mach 1 and the Mach 2, and that's obviously going to be in maneuverability. The Mach 1 has a very common shape, nearly identical to the Jolla Hyperion, so for those of you who have tried something similar in that extended shape, it will be much of the same. Because the Mach 2 is so much shorter, it is significantly more maneuverable, but it's not just more maneuverable than the Mach 1, it's more maneuverable than 99% of paddles out there. Like the Scorpius, the Mach 2 has an insanely long handle for such a short paddle. This means that the paddle face is also very short. The paddle face causes significantly more drag than the handle because it's so much less aerodynamic. So when you combine such a short overall length with a long handle and short face, you have a paddle that moves absolutely rapidly through the air. It's only really comparable to the Vanguard Power Epic and Jolla Scorpius in terms of maneuverability and hand speed. Playing with it really does open a whole new world of possibilities in terms of reaction time at the net. It almost feels like you're cheating. Again, it's not that maneuverability is bad on the Mach 1, but it's an extended paddle, so it is worse than shorter paddles, and it's significantly worse than on the Mach 2, but let's move on to power. So you see the word Forza and automatically think power, and while these are more powerful than the original Mach 1 and Mach 2, they are noticeably less powerful than the most powerful Gen 2 thermoform paddles. There is a softer overall response, especially when you're going for faster paced ground strokes. You can feel the ball sink into the paddle face more than on those instantly responsive Gen 2 thermoform paddles like the Vatic Pros or Carbon Powers. This means that you won't push the ball as deep on ground strokes and you'll have to work on adding pace and power to your serve, but it's certainly not all bad in terms of power. Both the Mach 1 and Mach 2 are very poppy. Now, we've discussed pop before. Pop is the power when you're not swinging big, and it's the type of power you're looking for on volleys at the net. The response is still not quite as rigid as Gen 2 thermoform paddles, but these are much closer to them in pop than they are in their full pace power, so if you're looking for put-away power at the net, you will be just fine with these. To me, pop is more important than power from the baseline because if you've made your way to the net in a situation where you can hit a put-away volley, you want a paddle that can help you end the point there right away. I don't usually do this, but if I were to grade power with these paddles, it would be a 7 and pop would be a 9. The reason I'm specifying this is because the Rhombus Novas are two other paddles that have very different levels of pop and power, but those paddles are opposite in that it's their pop that's lower and their full pace power that's higher. I prefer the power profile of the Forzas because, like I said, I place more value on pop rather than power, but I'll talk about why that isn't all good in the control section a little later. Now, between the Mach 1 and 2, the Mach 1 has significantly more leverage because it's longer, so in terms of power, when you're able to swing full, it's much higher, but this definitely isn't as noticeable when you're volleying. So pop being higher is great for volleying because it makes it easier to end points quickly. But pop being too high can also end points quickly in the other direction. One of the major issues with pop on thermoform paddles is that it's very easy to add too much pop to your dink, reset, or drop shot, which gives your opponent a chance to pounce on your overhit ball. This is why I'm such a big fan of the power to control ratio on the Novas, because they are so much softer for slower paced touch shots that they're actually quite good in the soft game, which just isn't the case on the Forzas. Their control for dinks, resets, and drops is more along the lines of what you'll get from those Gen 2 thermoform paddles, so that means if you want control in the soft game, you're going to have to develop it yourself. Between the Mach 1 and the Mach 2, there is going to be a noticeable difference in their control though. Because the Mach 2 sweet spot is so much wider, you'll have an easier time controlling your dinks because the paddle is less punishing, and because a wider sweet spot also makes for a softer overall response. On top of that, because this paddle is so maneuverable, you have much more minute control over the paddle face, which is extremely useful when you're going for the deceptive type of control shot. Feigning one way and then hitting your shot in the other direction can be very effective in pickleball, which is easy to do on the Mach 2. So, despite the paddle not having the softest feel, it actually has quite a good control profile overall. Now you might be thinking, okay, this review hasn't been all positive, power isn't top tier, pop is good, but you're saying that takes away from its soft control. Well, this is where things are going to take a very positive turn. A paddle's feel is very difficult to describe, and because of that, it's hard to generate a lot of hype around it with marketing the way you can something like spin or power. The reality is, feel is extremely important, and good feel is what separates good paddles from the best paddles on the market, the proof being that professional players are still using the Yola Perseus despite its spin being slightly lower, I think because it has such good feel. It's a similar story with the Forzas. The feel and connection you have for the ball here is some of the best I've ever tried. Good feel means that the paddle has a lot of feedback, both positive and negative. Positive feedback makes you want to hit the same shot again, and negative feedback makes you think the exact opposite. Feedback ultimately leads to the perfect understanding for how the ball will respond when it leaves the paddle face. And that means these paddles may not wow you with their softness, but that won't matter too much for control in the long run. Once you've taken the time to get used to the launch on the Forzas, that great feel will make it so that you know exactly what to do to still get control in the soft game. These paddles won't necessarily help you with control the way soft paddles will, but if you mess up a dink, I can promise you it will be your fault, and the paddle will let you know exactly that with negative feedback. I got to a point with the Forzas where I was so dialed in thanks to that fantastic feel, where I really felt like I couldn't miss even in the soft game. I knew I couldn't swing too hard on dinks, resets, and drops, but that didn't matter, I just toned down my stroke. That's why good feel is so important in the soft game, and why I actually end up preferring a stiffer paddle with good feel compared to a softer paddle with a muted response. A lot of people like more muted paddles because there isn't as stark a difference in feel inside the sweet spot compared to outside the sweet spot. It all kind of just blends together, which makes it neither punishing nor very rewarding. This is where it gets even better on the Forzas because the feel is so good and the sweet spot is quite big, so you kind of get the best of both worlds where it's not punishing and it's rewarding. That's a rare sensation and something I've really only felt on Yola paddles, Rhombus Novas, and maybe the Double Black Diamond. I sort of left the best for last, but between spin and feel, I can't really say which one I prefer, but I love the spin profile of both the Mach 1 and Mach 2 Forzas. The Mach 1 Forza has that classic extended paddle leverage, which is important for top-end spin potential on ground strokes. Now that softer feel might make you think that spin is lower, but it didn't actually really feel that way. The slightly extended dwell time means the paddle has more time to grab onto the ball, so you feel like you can dig into it and benefit from its grit a little more. It may not have the same one-to-one transfer of spin like those Gen 2 thermoform paddles, but it feels a little bit more like a tennis racket where you feel like you can control the amount of spin with your wrist movement mid-swing. Now the Mach 2 Forza has the same grabby sensation on the ball, but it's the unique swing pattern because of this short overall length and short paddle face that makes it very different to the Mach 1 and honestly pretty different to every other paddle in this industry. Because most short paddles like this have longer faces and shorter handles, the pivot point ends up being lowered down the paddle, which makes them feel less whippy than extended paddles. On the Mach 2, the pivot point feels like it's a little bit higher, more similar to extended paddles, but also much, much faster than those, so you can whip this thing through contact at a ridiculously fast pace. The easiest way to generate spin is by producing paddle head speed, so because it's so fast, it almost feels like you have infinite access to spin potential. Yes, the leverage is still lower than extended paddles, but that quicker overall speed makes up for it, maybe not in top end spin, but definitely in spin variety. Roll volleys and spin from difficult randomized positions are a dream with the Mach 2. Think what they are on hybrid paddles like the Flashes and double black diamonds, then crank that up even higher because of this unique shorter shape. Basically, this is the ultimate spin paddle, and I don't know if it will top the charts in terms of true spin potential, but that X Factor quickness makes it one of the GOATs for any type of spin shot. So that's kind of it with the Forzas. We've covered every category, and if you've watched up until now, you've probably realized these are another couple of paddles that kind of color between the lines of that super powerful but also semi-controlled paddle feel. I'm still thinking of doing a video to compare all those paddles, so I'll add these in with the Pickleball Apes paddles, the Rhombus Novas, and I think the Ruby might be in by the time I'm back in Vancouver. Also, sorry if I got a little all over the place with that feel section there. I'm very passionate about feel and I try to describe it in as much detail as possible, but I know it can be confusing, so ask me for clarification in the comments if you need. For now though, that is going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you do want to demo either of the Forzas, you can come visit us in store, or you can check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.